Police officers notice a black girl and decide to follow her, suspecting the worst. They are ready to catch her in the act, but what they find at the end of the trail shocks them. The city pulsed with restless energy, a mosaic of towering glass buildings and shadowed alleyways. Neon signs flickered in the evening haze, and the muffled symphony of car horns, distant sirens, and hurried footsteps filled the air. Pedestrians rushed past each other with barely a glance, faces lit by the cold glow of their phones. Luxury stores displayed their treasures behind pristine windows, but just a few blocks away, the glittering facade crumbled into cracked sidewalks, shuttered shops, and graffiti-stained walls. It was a city of contrasts, wealth and poverty, hope and despair, all colliding beneath the same crawling sky. Detective Tom Harper sat behind the wheel of the unmarked cruiser, his rough hands gripping the steering wheel with the ease of long habit. His sharp eyes scanned the bustling scene through the windshield, every flicker of movement feeding his instinct honed by 20 years on the force. He was a man who trusted patterns, the way people moved, their eyes, their body language. It rarely lied to him. Next to him, Detective Jackson Reed stirred his coffee, the rich, bitter aroma filling the car. He was younger by over a decade, with a calm, attentive demeanor that often softened the edge of Harper's no-nonsense approach. The radio crackled to life, breaking the rhythm of the street noise. Unit 35, we have a report from Westbrook Mall. Possible theft or loitering. Suspect described as a young black female, approximately 10 years old. Seen entering and exiting the same store multiple times without purchasing. Requesting plainclothes surveillance. Tom's brow furrowed as he glanced at Jackson. A kid? Jackson mid-sip lowered his cup. Maybe she's lost or waiting for someone. Tom's voice was clipped. Or casing the place for a quick grab. You'd be surprised how many they recruit young these days. Jackson gave him a sideways look but said nothing. Harper's instincts had proven right more times than he cared to count, but something about pursuing a child felt wrong. Still, he understood the protocol: observe first, intervene if necessary. The cruiser glided smoothly into the Westbrook Mall lot, settling into an inconspicuous corner with a clear line of sight to the main entrance. Through the wide glass doors, the bustling crowd streamed in and out, a flow of shoppers carrying bags from designer outlets, teenagers laughing in clusters, parents corralling excited toddlers. And then they saw her. The girl emerged from the store, her frame small and fragile beneath an oversized, faded jacket. Her hair was pulled into 2 neat pigtails, and a worn-out backpack sagged on her narrow shoulders. She clutched a small paper bag tightly, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting someone to stop her. For a moment, she hesitated on the curb, then, with a quick glance around, she began walking away from the mall. That her? Jackson asked, already knowing the answer. Matches the description, Tom replied. His hand hovered near the radio, but he didn't call it in. Not yet. The girl's behavior puzzled him. She hadn't run. She hadn't tried to conceal anything. There was no sign of a lookout or accomplice. If she was up to something, she was either very good or very desperate. Let's follow, Tom said, easing the car into motion. The girl moved quickly but without panic, her steps purposeful. She turned onto the main road, weaving through the evening foot traffic. She crossed at the lights, her eyes flicking from side to side, cautious, but not reckless. She wasn't running from anyone. She was running to somewhere. The further she walked, the more the city changed. The polished storefronts and branded banners faded into discount stores, pawn shops, and boarded-up cafes. Neon lights gave way to flickering street lamps. The air grew thick with the mingled sense of fried food, exhaust, and something more sour, decay beneath the city's glossy surface. She's heading into Lower Town, Jackson murmured. The district was notorious: crumbling buildings, frequent busts, and a population the system had long since failed. Tom's grip on the wheel tightened. Nothing good's waiting for her there. The girl slipped through a chain-link fence where a section had been torn away, leading into a lot filled with cracked pavement and weeds. Beyond it stood a building, 3 stories of boarded windows and peeling paint, its once grand facade now a monument to neglect. The old Fairfax apartments, Tom muttered. He recognized it from past calls, squatters, drug busts, domestic disturbances. Looks like we found her hideout, he added. Tom, Jackson said, his voice weighted with hesitation. She's a kid. We don't know what this is. Tom's eyes stayed on the building. I know what this place is. Kids don't come here for anything good. The girl paused at the entrance, digging into her backpack. She pulled out a tarnished key and struggled with the stiff lock, her small frame straining as she pushed the door open and disappeared inside. Tom put the car in park. We can't leave it at this, Jackson said firmly. We don't have probable cause. She hasn't done anything. Tom's jaw worked, his fingers flexing on the wheel. My gut says something's wrong. You want to wait for it to get worse before we step in? Jackson met his gaze, the unspoken tension between them crackling in the air, protocol against instinct, restraint against action. Finally, Jackson nodded. Let's check it out. The building swallowed them in shadow, the air thick with mildew and a faint metallic tang. The soft creak of warped floorboards under their boots was the only sound as they moved through the dim, peeling corridor. The silence felt unnatural, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Faintly, from above, they heard it, a muffled voice, small and uncertain, followed by the faint rustle of movement. Children. They reached the second floor, where a single strip of light bled from beneath a crooked door. At the same moment, they saw her, the girl on her tiptoes, trying to fit the ancient key into the lock with trembling hands. Her eyes met theirs, wide with sudden terror. She froze, her whole body taut with panic. Her voice broke, thin and desperate. I didn't steal anything, I swear. The paper bag slipped from her hand, landing with a soft crinkle on the floor. From its torn opening spilled the contents, 2 sandwiches, a bottle of juice, and a small pack of crackers. The moment stretched her fear, their confusion, and the raw edge of something unspoken. The girl's voice, trembling but defiant, pleaded, "Please don't take me away." Jackson felt his pulse slow, the chaos distilling into something painfully clear. "Tom," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think we're here for what we thought." Tom's gaze, hardened from years of expecting the worst, wavered as something unfamiliar tugged beneath his ribs. The girl's fingers trembled on the key. The door, worn and battered, hung half ajar. And beyond it, something waited, an answer neither of them could have predicted. The air felt thick with the weight of a truth just beyond reach. Tom's voice, low and rough, broke the silence. "Let's see what's going on." With a soft creak, the door opened. The shadows inside shifted, and the world they thought they knew began to unravel. The musty air of the building lingered on their skin as they stepped further inside. The dim hallway stretched before them, lined with peeling wallpaper and doors that seemed long abandoned. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint scuff of their boots on the warped floorboards. Somewhere in the distance, a pipe groaned, the slow drip echoing like a heartbeat through the hollow walls. The girl stood frozen, her back pressed against the chipped frame of the doorway, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. She clutched the worn straps of her backpack, her knuckles white. The paper bag with the scattered food lay at her feet, a pitiful offering in the face of her terror. Her eyes flicked between them, wide and shimmering, her body tense as if ready to bolt. Neither officer moved. Tom's voice, low and measured, broke the silence. "Hey, it's okay. We're not here to hurt you." The girl's lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, her gaze darted to the darkened space behind her, where the faintest rustle hinted at unseen company. The shift was so subtle, but it didn't escape Tom's eyes. He felt it in his gut. This wasn't just about her. A soft, small cough came from inside the room. The girl's body stiffened further, her voice a whisper, barely audible, cracked with fear. "Please don't." But Tom's instinct took over. His gaze met Jackson's, and in that unspoken second, they both knew this was bigger than a frightened child. Tom's hand moved to the door, slow but firm, and he pushed it open. The hinges, corroded with time, groaned in protest as the door swung wide. The room beyond was a skeleton of what had once been an apartment. The wallpaper had rotted into strips, the ceiling bore the scars of water damage, and the floor was a patchwork of warped boards. The only light seeped through a gap where a curtain had once been, casting pale beams across the wreckage. And then they saw them. Children. 5 of them, all younger than the girl, huddled in a corner near a threadbare mattress. Their faces were thin, smudged with dirt, their clothes ragged and ill-fitting. Their eyes, round, glassy, and wide with fear, locked onto the officers with a silent, primal plea. The oldest child, a boy with matted hair and hollow cheeks, moved instinctively in front of the others, his body shielding them. His voice, hoarse but defiant, scraped through the silence. "Leave us alone." Tom froze. The hard edge of his training, his years of anticipating the worst, collided with the raw scene before him. These weren't criminals. They were survivors. The girl, her voice trembling but urgent, broke through the tension. "Please don't call anyone. Don't take them. I was just trying to help." Her words hung between them, fragile and exposed. Jackson, his heart pounding, lowered his stance, his voice soft but firm. "What's your name?" A long pause. The girl's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "Lily." Tom's voice, rougher but steady, followed. "And these kids?" Lily's eyes flicked to them, her chin trembling. They're like me. They don't have anywhere to go. I found them. I couldn't leave them alone." The room felt too small to hold the weight of what she was saying. Jackson's gaze swept the apartment. The pile of scavenged blankets, the empty cans lined neatly against the wall, the cracked bowl of water beside the mattress, the makeshift attempts of a child trying to build a shelter against a world too cruel for her age. Tom's eyes landed on the boy at the front. His arms, bony and too thin for his age, bore the purple ghosts of bruises. A fight? No, not from another child. Something worse. The pieces began to fall into place, and the story, unspoken but searing, formed in the silence. Lily's voice, a whisper, cracked with exhaustion and fear. I used all I had to buy them food today. I didn't steal, I swear. But if you call someone, they'll take us all. Split us up." Her voice broke then, the veneer of bravery cracking as tears welled in her eyes. "I can't let them take us away." Tom felt the air in his lungs grow heavy. He had seen desperation before, on addicts, on criminals, on parents clinging to hope. But never like this. Never wrapped in pigtails and a child's trembling voice. Jackson's voice was low but weighted with certainty. "We're not here to tear you apart, Lily." His eyes, soft but unyielding, found hers. "We're here now, and you don't have to do this alone." But Lily's body stayed taut with the sharp-edged instinct of a child who had learned that promises often broke worse than bones. Her voice was tight, pleading. "Please don't call anyone. Please." The other children clung to one another, their small faces barely peeking from behind the boy's frail frame. Tom's jaw clenched, his throat thick as he spoke through the sudden weight in his chest. "We're not making any calls. Not until we understand what's really going on." The tension, thin as glass, shuddered, but it did not break. Lily's eyes, still damp, searched his face. She saw something there. Something different from the cold glare she had grown used to. She didn't trust it. Not yet. But she didn't run either. Minutes passed like hours until, finally, her small fingers eased from their tight grip on her backpack. She shifted, and the boy at the front, as if reading something in her posture, eased just slightly to the side. Tom and Jackson took it as the only invitation they would get. Jackson stepped forward first, his eyes on the children, his voice low and warm. "Anyone hurt?" The boy, older than the rest, but still heartbreakingly young, shook his head once. But Jackson caught the flicker of his eyes toward the smallest child, a little girl curled tight against the mattress. He knelt, careful not to tower over them. "Is she sick?" Lily's voice, thin and tight. "She hasn't eaten. Not for 2 days. I was trying." Tom was already reaching for his radio, but his fingers stopped short, brushing the cool plastic. He felt the air shift. Lily's eyes burning into him with raw panic. Her lips parted, and her whole body tensed as if she was ready to fight. But he didn't press the button. Instead, his voice, gravel against stone but somehow softer. "Jackson, get the first aid kit. And whatever snacks we've got left." Jackson moved instantly, retreating to the hall and returning with the worn med pack and a crumpled bag of granola bars from the glove compartment. He set them down without a word and backed off. The children didn't move. Only when Lily, slow and cautious, reached out to tear open a wrapper did the smallest child stir, her tiny fingers fumbling toward the food. A brittle crack echoed through the room as the granola bar snapped in half. Lily placed one piece in the girl's palm and kept the other for herself. Only after the child's small, shaking hands brought it to her lips did Lily's chest release a slow, shuddering breath. Tom felt something shift, like the ground beneath him had moved and everything he knew had tilted slightly off its axis. This wasn't a crime scene. It was a sanctuary. Fractured, starved, and desperate. But a sanctuary nonetheless. And they had stepped into it with guns and suspicion. Jackson broke the silence, his voice a quiet tremor. "What's the story, Lily?" Lily's eyes, still wary but no longer hard, flicked toward the children, then back. Her voice, soft and raw, carried the weight of a truth no child should bear. "My parents died last year. I was living with my grandma, but..." Her voice hitched. "She got real sick. She's in the hospital. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't leave them." She swallowed, her voice barely holding. "They've been on the streets. I found them. No one cares. No one looks for kids like us. We just disappear." Her last words, "we just disappear," hit like a punch to the ribs. Tom's mouth felt dry. "You've been taking care of them on your own?" Lily's chin lifted, her voice trembling but fierce. "Who else would?" Jackson exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking deep. He had seen the system fail before too many times. He knew Lily's fear wasn't unfounded. Kids slipped through the cracks all the time, lost to shelters, group homes, or worse. But he also knew that leaving them here like this was a slow kind of dying. "You can't keep doing this alone," Jackson said, his voice quiet but firm. Lily's fingers curled into the fabric of her jeans. "I don't have a choice." Tom ran a hand over his face. "That's not true." "You do now." Her eyes flicked between them, sharp and searching. "If I let you help, you'll call someone. You'll bring the system in. And we'll all get split up." Tom's voice was steady, unshakable. "No system. No reports. Not until we figure out a way to keep you together." The silence stretched, tense and brittle. The other children watched with wide, uncertain eyes. Lily's breath shuddered out. "You can't promise that." Jackson knelt beside her, his tone gentle but sure. "You don't have to trust us, but you have to trust that we won't leave you here to starve." She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. "Maya needs medicine. She's been sick for days. And we need food. They're hungry all the time." Tom's decision was immediate. "Then let's fix that right now." Jackson nodded and stood. "I'll go." Lily's head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. "No, don't bring anyone else here." Jackson met her gaze steadily. "I'm not calling anyone. Just getting food. Medicine. That's all." Her lips pressed together, fighting the instinct to say no, but after a long moment, she gave a small, jerking nod. "Okay." Without another word, Jackson slipped out the door. The silence that followed was vast, the air brittle. Tom remained, his tall figure a still presence in the broken room. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stayed. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, Lily's voice broke the silence, thin and brittle. "You'll tell me the truth?" Tom's eyes, dark and steady, found hers. "Always." Her fingers twisted in the frayed fabric of her jeans. She hesitated, then the dam cracked, and the truth poured out. "My mom and dad." Her voice wavered, each word like glass beneath her tongue. "They died last year. Drunk driver." She paused, swallowing a shuddering breath. "It was just me and Grandma after that." Tom stayed silent, letting her speak at her own pace. She tried. She did. But then she got sick. Real bad. Her voice wobbled. She collapsed a month ago. Ambulance took her. I haven't seen her since. They said she's still alive, but I don't know anything else. Nobody tells me anything. Her voice turned hollow. I was supposed to go to a shelter, but I didn't. I ran. Tom's voice was gentle but steady. And you found them? Her eyes flicked to the children, soft with something fragile and fierce. Yeah. Maya was first. She was alone. She didn't even talk for days. She swallowed hard. The others, too. Nobody cared they were missing. Nobody was looking. So I stayed. Tom's throat was tight. You've been taking care of them by yourself? Her chin lifted, defiant despite the exhaustion dragging at her. Who else would? Before Tom could answer, soft footsteps returned, and Jackson reappeared, carrying 2 paper bags and a small plastic one. The scent of fresh bread, apples, and soup containers cut through the sour air. He set them down, then pulled a bottle of children's fever medicine from the smaller bag. Lily's eyes widened, her voice a thin thread. You really? Jackson smiled softly. No promises. Just action. For the first time, Lily's mask cracked fully. Relief, sharp and painful, flickered across her face. Her knees buckled, and for a breathless second, she swayed. Then Tom was there, steady hands catching her before she could hit the floor. Her voice, muffled against his jacket, broke with exhaustion. I can't keep doing this. Tom's voice was gruff but warm. You're not alone anymore, kid. They laid Maya carefully on the mattress. Jackson opened the medicine, measuring a small dose. Lily's fingers brushed through Maya's curls as the little girl swallowed the sweet syrup with a weak, fluttering breath. The other children, drawn by the scent of food, crept closer. Jackson opened a soup container, and the warm, rich aroma made their hollow eyes spark with hunger. Eat, he said simply. They didn't wait. Small hands, careful and desperate, reached out. The room filled with the soft, broken sounds of chewing and shallow sips. Tom watched them, every hollow face, every tooth and limb, every flicker of life that returned with each bite. His heart, worn from decades of hard choices, felt raw and exposed. He looked at Jackson. We can't leave it like this. Jackson's eyes, soft but certain, met his. We won't. Tom's voice was hard with resolve. No calls. No system. Not until we know they're safe. Jackson's reply was low and firm. Agreed. And in that moment, without paperwork, without orders, they made a decision. This wasn't a case. This was a fight. For them. For her. For what was right. The night pressed against the windows, cold and vast. But inside, in the brittle, broken room, a flicker of warmth began to bloom. Not a rescue. A promise. They would not lose her. They would not lose any of them. Not to the streets. Not to the cracks. Not this time. The first light of dawn crept through the grimy windows, casting a pale glow over the room. The air was thick with the mingled scents of soup, stale wood, and something warmer, hope, still too fresh to be certain, but present nonetheless. The children, their bellies no longer hollow, had curled together in a fragile huddle on the mattress and floor, their soft, rhythmic breaths the only sound in the stillness. The smallest, Maya, now slept more peacefully, her forehead no longer burning with fever. Beside her, Lily sat cross-legged, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but unclosing, watchful, protective, unwilling to surrender to rest. Tom and Jackson leaned against the cracked wall, watching in silence. The previous night had stripped something from them, layers of detachment built through years of hard calls and harder choices. Tom's face, lined and weathered, was tight with rare tension, his arms folded across his chest. Jackson, his younger features drawn but determined, glanced sideways at his partner. We can't leave them like this, Jackson said softly, his voice rough from the weight of the night. Tom's jaw shifted. I know. His voice was low, gravel thickened by something he rarely let show. But if we call it in, they'll be scattered. She knows it. We know it. Jackson's gaze returned to the children. Then we don't let that happen. His voice carried no question, only certainty. We find another way. Lily's voice, worn thin but sharp with suspicion, sliced through the air. You're still here. She didn't move, her eyes fixed on them like a cornered animal testing the edge of a cage. Tom's reply came steady and rough. Yeah, we are. He pushed off the wall, his boots scuffing against the warped floorboards. And we're not going anywhere. Lily's fingers curled tightly in the fabric of Maya's shirt, her lips pressed to a pale line. They always say that. Right before everything falls apart. Jackson's voice, softer but firm, answered. We're not them. The silence stretched taut and trembling, but this time, something shifted. Lily's shoulders, tight and sharp with defiance, dropped just a fraction. It wasn't trust. But it was the absence of fight. A ceasefire in a war she'd fought alone for far too long. Jackson moved first, setting the unopened first aid kit beside her. In case she needs it, he murmured. No pressure. No expectations. Lily's gaze flicked to it, wary. Why are you still here? Tom's voice came even, solid. Because leaving you here like this would be wrong. His eyes, shadowed with years of seeing too much, met hers. You don't deserve to face this alone. Lily's lip trembled, but she pressed it hard between her teeth, fighting to hold herself together. Maya stirred weakly on the mattress, the half-eaten granola bar still clutched in her tiny fist. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale beneath the smudge of dirt. Lily knelt beside her, brushing a gentle hand over the girl's damp forehead. She's been sick, Lily said softly, her voice thin with helplessness. I tried to get her medicine, but... Her fingers curled against the mattress, her voice trailing into the heavy silence. Jackson's eyes softened. She needs help, Lily. I know, Lily snapped, the crack in her voice betraying the fear beneath her anger. But if I let you call someone, they'll take her. They'll take all of us. Foster homes. Shelters. We'll be gone. Her voice dropped to a whisper, hoarse and raw. We'll lose each other. The other children pressed closer together at her words, their silent faces painted with the same unspoken terror. Tom exhaled slowly, the weight of her fear sinking deep. I've seen the system fail too many times, he admitted. I won't let it fail you. Lily's eyes flashed, anger and pain flaring. You can't promise that. Tom's jaw clenched. We don't make empty promises. His voice was low, weighted with something unshakable. But I swear to you, we'll find a way to help you without tearing you apart. The room went still, the air between them taut as wire. Finally, Lily's small shoulders, tight with the unbearable strain of holding the world alone, slumped. She didn't trust them. Not yet. But she was losing the strength to fight. She looked at Maya, then back at them. She needs medicine. And we need food. They're hungry all the time. Tom's decision was immediate. Then let's fix that. Right now. Jackson nodded and stood. I'll go. Lily's head snapped up. No. The panic flared instantly. Don't bring anyone else here. Jackson met her gaze steadily. I'm not calling anyone. Just going to get food, medicine. That's all. Her lips pressed tight, but after a moment, she gave a small, jerking nod. Okay. Jackson slipped out the door. The silence that followed was vast, the air brittle. Tom remained, his tall figure a still presence in the broken room. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stayed. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, Lily's voice broke the silence, thin and brittle. You'll tell me the truth? Tom's eyes, dark and steady, found hers. Always. Her fingers twisted in the frayed fabric of her jeans. She hesitated, then the dam cracked, and the truth poured out. My mom and dad. Her voice wavered, each word like glass beneath her tongue. They died last year. Drunk driver. She paused, swallowing a shuddering breath. It was just me and Grandma after that. Tom stayed silent, letting her speak at her own pace. She tried. She did. But then she got sick. Real bad. Her voice wobbled. She collapsed a month ago. Ambulance took her. I haven't seen her since. They said she's still alive, but I don't know anything else. Nobody tells me anything. Her voice turned hollow. I was supposed to go to a shelter, but I didn't. I ran. Tom's voice was gentle but steady. And you found them? Her eyes flicked to the children, soft with something fragile and fierce. Yeah. Maya was first. She was alone. She didn't even talk for days. She swallowed hard. The others, too. Nobody cared they were missing. Nobody was looking. So I stayed. Tom's throat was tight. You've been taking care of them by yourself? Her chin lifted, defiant despite the exhaustion dragging at her. Who else would? Before Tom could answer, soft footsteps returned and Jackson reappeared, carrying 2 paper bags and a small plastic one. The scent of fresh bread, apples, and soup containers cut through the sour air. He set them down, then pulled a bottle of children's fever medicine from the smaller bag. Lily's eyes widened, her voice a thin thread. You really? Jackson smiled softly. No promises. Just action. For the first time, Lily's mask cracked fully. Relief, sharp and painful, flickered across her face. Her knees buckled, and for a breathless second, she swayed. Then Tom was there, steady hands catching her before she could hit the floor. Her voice, muffled against his jacket, broke with exhaustion. I can't keep doing this. Tom's voice was gruff but warm. You're not alone anymore, kid. They laid Maya carefully on the mattress. Jackson opened the medicine, measuring a small dose. Lily's fingers brushed through Maya's curls as the little girl swallowed the sweet syrup with a weak, fluttering breath. The other children, drawn by the scent of food, crept closer. Jackson opened a soup container, and the warm, rich aroma made their hollow eyes spark with hunger. Eat, he said simply. They didn't wait. Small hands, careful and desperate, reached out. The room filled with the soft, broken sounds of chewing and shallow sips. Tom watched them, every hollow face, every tooth and limb, every flicker of life that returned with each bite. His heart, worn from decades of hard choices, felt raw and exposed. He looked at Jackson. We can't leave it like this. Jackson's eyes, soft but certain, met his. We won't. The minutes stretched, thick with unspoken understanding. The children ate slowly at first, cautious, their bodies stiff with the instinct to ration what little they had. Then hunger took over, and they devoured the food with desperate, trembling hands. Lily barely touched hers. She sat beside Maya, her hand resting lightly on the little girl's back, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. Jackson handed her a bottle of water. You should eat, too. Lily hesitated, then took a sip, her fingers tight around the plastic. I will. Just, not yet. Tom watched her, the weight of her exhaustion carved into every line of her small frame. The girl had been carrying too much for too long. It was a miracle she was still standing. We need to get your grandma, Jackson said finally. Lily's head snapped up. No. Tom didn't flinch at her sharpness. She's alive, Lily. She's in St. Vincent's. You've been holding on for her. Now let her hold on for you. Lily's hands clenched into fists. If you take me there, you'll call someone. They'll separate us. Jackson shook his head. We're not making any calls. Not yet. But you need to see her. And she needs to know you're okay. Lily's jaw tightened, her shoulders drawing in. She was trying to weigh the risks, trying to find the angle where she wouldn't lose everything. Tom's voice softened. You don't have to trust us. Just let us take you to her. That's all. Lily swallowed hard. And the kids? They stay here, Jackson said. We'll come right back. She turned to the others. The boy, the oldest of them after her, looked hesitant but nodded. We'll be okay. Lily looked back at Tom and Jackson, eyes still wary, but something in her resistance broke. She gave a small nod. Okay. They left quietly, slipping through the back alleys to avoid attention. The city stretched ahead, gray and endless as Tom drove towards St. Vincent's Hospital. Lily sat stiffly in the back seat, her fingers curled in her lap, her eyes flicking to the window every few seconds as if she might still change her mind. The hospital was bright, sterile, a world apart from where she had been surviving. The moment they stepped inside, Lily's breathing changed, shallow, quick, like a trapped animal sensing danger. Jackson crouched beside her. "We're just going to see her. No one's taking you away." Lily nodded, but the tension in her didn't ease. A nurse led them down a hallway lined with beeping monitors and quiet voices. When they stopped outside a door, Lily hesitated. Her fingers clenched into her sleeves. Then she stepped inside. The woman in the bed was thin, her skin sallow, her gray hair spread against the pillow. But when her eyes opened and landed on Lily, something flickered awake inside her. "My girl," she whispered, her voice frail but filled with relief. Lily let out a sharp breath, a sound too close to a sob. "I didn't leave you," she choked out. "I didn't." Margaret Brooks reached out a shaking hand, and Lily rushed forward, her small fingers latching onto her grandmother's like a lifeline. "You didn't leave me," Margaret murmured, her voice thick. "You saved them." Tom and Jackson stepped back, giving them space. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them had to. Minutes passed before Lily finally turned to them, her face wet with tears. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. Tom exhaled, his jaw tight with the weight of the decision ahead. "Now," he said, "we figure out how to keep you together." Lily held her grandmother's hand even tighter. "No shelters. No splitting us up." Tom nodded. "No splitting up." Jackson spoke next. "We know a place. It's not the system. It's safe." Lily hesitated. Margaret's voice was weak, but sure. "Go with them, Lily. I'll still be here." Lily squeezed her eyes shut, then gave the smallest nod. Okay. They left the hospital with a plan. The kids wouldn't go back to the abandoned apartment. Not tonight. Not ever again. Tom made a call, off the record, to a contact he trusted, someone who knew how to keep families like Lily's together, outside of the system's reach. By nightfall, the kids had a place to stay. A warm place. A safe one. And for the first time in too long, Lily let herself believe they might be okay. She turned to Tom and Jackson as they stood by the door. "You're really not calling anyone?" Tom shook his head. "Not unless you want us to." Lily looked at them, searching their faces for any sign of a lie. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you." Tom and Jackson exchanged a glance. They weren't used to gratitude. But this time, they'd earned it. The days that followed didn't erase the struggle, but they changed its course. The shelter Tom and Jackson had arranged wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a safe house, run by people who understood what happened when the system failed kids like Lily. There were no caseworkers knocking on doors, no officers coming to take statements. Just warm meals, clean clothes, and adults who didn't look at them like they were a problem to be solved. Lily remained cautious. She stayed close to Maya, her sharp eyes scanning every unfamiliar face, waiting for the moment it all fell apart. The other kids followed her lead, trusting her to keep them safe the way she always had. But as the days passed and no one came to take them away, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. Jackson visited often, bringing food, blankets, books. He never stayed long, never pushed. Just enough to let them know he wasn't gone. Tom came less, but when he did, Lily noticed the way he watched, the way he took everything in. He was waiting, she realized. Waiting to see if she'd let herself believe this was real. The call from the hospital came a week later. Margaret Brooks was being discharged. Lily barely heard the rest of the conversation before she was up, grabbing her shoes, her heart hammering. "Take me to her," she said, breathless. Tom and Jackson drove her to the hospital, silent as she bounced her leg in the back seat, gripping the frayed straps of her backpack. The reunion was quiet. Margaret was weaker than before, but she was alive. And when she saw Lily, her tired eyes filled with something that made the weight on Lily's chest finally lift. "You're okay," Margaret whispered, brushing a trembling hand against her granddaughter's cheek. Lily swallowed hard. "We're all okay." She didn't ask if they could be together. She didn't beg. She had learned not to. But Tom spoke anyway. "You'll stay with her," he said simply. "All of you." Lily's breath caught. "What?" Jackson crouched beside her. "We made some calls. There's a program. It's not the system, it's better. Keeps families together. Gives them a chance." He glanced at Margaret. "A social worker's meeting you tomorrow. No foster care. Just help." Lily blinked hard, gripping Margaret's hand. "No shelters." "No shelters," Tom confirmed. Lily didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. The process wasn't easy. Paperwork, interviews, home visits, things that should have made everything harder. But this time, for once, the adults in her life weren't working against her. Weeks later, when she sat on the floor of their new apartment, surrounded by the kids she had fought to protect, she let herself breathe. She didn't have to run anymore. And for the first time in too long, she let herself believe. Tom and Jackson visited sometimes. Never unannounced, never too much. Just enough. One day, as they were leaving, Lily pressed something into Tom's hand. A folded piece of paper. He opened it, eyes scanning the shaky, childlike drawing. 6 children. An old woman. 2 officers. Above them, scrawled in uneven letters, were 3 words. "My heroes. Always." Tom stared at it, his throat thick. Beside him, Jackson let out a quiet breath. "She sees us," Jackson murmured. Tom's voice was rough, but certain. "No," he said. "She showed us." And for the first time in too long, Tom Harper didn't feel the weight of the world as a burden. He felt it as a purpose. The weeks turned into months. Life didn't become perfect overnight, but for the first time in a long time, Lily and the others had stability. No more abandoned buildings, no more sleepless nights wondering where the next meal would come from. They had a home, a small, modest apartment with second-hand furniture and a kitchen that always smelled like something warm. Margaret, still frail but stronger every day, took to filling their tiny space with the sound of old music playing from a radio, the hum of soft conversations, and the occasional scolding when someone tracked dirt across the floor. The kids adjusted at their own pace. The boy, Eric, still flinched at sudden noises, still positioned himself protectively between the younger ones and the door. Maya clung to Lily, her little hand always reaching for hers as if afraid she might disappear. But there were changes, too. Subtle ones. They ate without fear now, without rushing to hide scraps away for later. They slept through the night. They laughed. Not always, not easily, but enough. Tom and Jackson checked in from time to time, careful not to overstep. They didn't wear their badges when they visited. Just 2 men showing up with extra groceries, a new set of school supplies, or, on one memorable occasion, a stray cat that had taken a liking to Jackson in the station parking lot. The kids named her Boots. She ruled the apartment within a week. One afternoon, Lily sat at the kitchen table, frowning at a sheet of math problems. Tom, seated across from her with a cup of coffee, raised an eyebrow. "Need help?" Lily huffed. "I don't need help." Tom took a slow sip. "Right. So you've just been staring at that problem for 10 minutes for fun?" Lily shot him a look, then, grudgingly, pushed the paper toward him. He studied it for a moment. "All right, what's throwing you off?" She hesitated, then pointed at a problem near the middle. "I don't get how you're supposed to know what to do first." Tom nodded. "Order of operations." "You ever hear the phrase, 'Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally'?" Lily wrinkled her nose. "That's a dumb name." Tom smirked. "Yeah, well, it works. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Do things in that order, and you won't mess it up." Lily tapped her pencil against the table, considering. "So, you always start with parentheses first?" "Yeah," Tom confirmed. "Anything inside them gets solved before anything else. Then you move down the list." Lily frowned, erasing a smudge on the paper before carefully working through the problem again. Tom watched, waiting. She was stubborn, fiercely independent, but she didn't give up easily. That was something. After a few minutes, she set the pencil down and pushed the paper back toward him. Is that right? Tom glanced over it, nodding. Looks good. Lily didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. Okay, that makes sense. Across the room, Margaret watched from her chair near the window. The sun streamed in behind her, turning her silver hair to pale gold. There was something soft in her gaze as she looked at Tom. You're good with her, she murmured. Tom leaned back, stretching his legs. She's sharp. Just needs someone to show her the steps. Margaret nodded. She's had to figure out too much on her own. Tom didn't argue. Instead, he set his cup down and looked at Lily. School starts next week. Lily stiffened, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. I know. You worried about it? Lily's jaw clenched. I'm not worried. It's just different now. Tom understood. For months, she had been responsible for the others, for surviving. School wasn't just about classes and homework. It was about stepping back into a world that had kept going without her, a world that had no idea what she had been through. You don't have to do everything alone anymore, Tom said simply. Lily didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. A knock at the door broke the moment. Jackson leaned in, holding up a bag. All right, I officially come bearing snacks. The younger kids perked up immediately, rushing over as Jackson dramatically pulled out bags of chips, fruit, and a carton of juice. Maya, I got you those little crackers with the cheese you like. And, Eric, I grabbed the spicy chips, but don't blame me if they're too hot. Eric snorted. They're never too hot. Jackson winked. Challenge accepted. The apartment filled with quiet laughter, the sound blending into the rustle of snack bags and the low hum of Margaret's radio. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was normal. For Lily, that was still something new. Later, after the kids had settled, Tom and Jackson lingered by the door. Tom turned to Margaret. If anything comes up, anything, you call us. Margaret smiled, tired but grateful. I will. Jackson patted the doorframe. And if Booth starts running an underground crime ring, I'd like to be informed. Margaret chuckled. Oh, she already has. You just don't know it yet. Lily stood nearby, arms crossed. You guys don't have to keep checking in. Tom met her eyes. Yeah, we do. Lily hesitated, then sighed. Fine. A pause. Then, quieter, thanks. Tom ruffled her hair once before she could duck away. Don't make me quiz you on math next time. Lily groaned. Ugh, go away already. Jackson grinned as he followed Tom out the door. See you soon, kid. The door shut behind them, leaving Lily standing in the quiet. She looked around the apartment, the faded couch, the old radio humming a soft tune, the kids curled up with their snacks. A few months ago, she had been sure none of this was possible. Now, for the first time in forever, she wasn't just surviving. She was home. Lily leaned against the door after Tom and Jackson left, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall. She wasn't used to people sticking around, not without expecting something in return. But they kept coming back. They didn't press her for answers she didn't want to give. They didn't make promises they wouldn't keep. Still, the idea of school gnawed at her. It wasn't just about going back to class. It was about stepping into a world that had moved on without her, where no one knew what she'd been through. That night, as the younger kids fell asleep, Lily lay awake staring at the ceiling. She could hear Maya's soft breathing beside her, could feel the faint warmth of Margaret's presence in the other room. The apartment was small, the walls thin, but it felt solid. Safe. She was still scared of losing it. The first day of school came too fast. Margaret had insisted on walking Lily and the others to the front doors, even though it took effort for her to keep up. Tom and Jackson had already called ahead, making sure the school knew the situation, making sure the kids wouldn't be shuffled into some system that didn't care. Lily stood at the edge of the sidewalk, watching other kids rush inside, some laughing, some groggy, some glued to their phones. It all felt so far away from where she had been. All right, sweetheart, Margaret said, squeezing Lily's hand. You don't have to be ready all at once. Just take it one day at a time. Lily nodded stiffly. Yeah. Okay. Eric, always quiet, gave her a small nod before heading toward his class. Maya clung to Lily's sleeve before a teacher gently led her toward the kindergarten hallway. And then Lily was alone. Not really, but it felt that way. She took a breath and stepped inside. The halls felt different than she remembered. Too loud, too bright. She could hear snippets of conversations, kids talking about vacations, about new clothes, about TV shows she hadn't seen. A few kids she used to know glanced at her. Some whispered. Some ignored her completely. She kept her head down and went straight to her first class. The teacher was kind enough not to make a big deal about her return. The desk felt foreign beneath her hands, the weight of a textbook unfamiliar. But she forced herself to focus. She had made it this far. She could keep going. Lunch was the hardest part. She had been used to eating whenever she could find food, grabbing what little she could and making it last. Now, she sat in a cafeteria full of kids who didn't have to think about hunger the way she had. She wasn't sure where to sit. Then, from across the room, a voice called out. "Hey, Lily." She turned, blinking in surprise. It was Sophia, a girl she used to know before everything had fallen apart. She had been one of the only kids who hadn't treated her like a ghost after her parents died. Sophia patted the empty seat beside her. "Come sit with us." Lily hesitated. Then, slowly, she walked over. She didn't talk much at first, but she listened. And for the first time, she let herself feel like maybe, just maybe, she could belong again. After school, Tom was waiting outside. Not hovering, not making a big deal out of it. Just leaning against his car, arms crossed, watching as the kids filed out. Lily raised an eyebrow. "You stalking me now?" Tom smirked. "Just making sure you didn't run for the hills." Lily snorted. "Thought about it. But you didn't." She shrugged. "Wasn't the worst day ever." Tom's expression softened. "That's a start." They didn't talk much on the ride home, but Lily didn't mind. When they pulled up to the apartment, Jackson was already there, sitting on the steps with a bag of groceries. "How was it?" he asked, handing her a candy bar. Lily stared at it. "You bribing me for answers?" Jackson grinned. "Maybe." She rolled her eyes, but took it anyway. "It was fine," she muttered. "Weird. But fine." Jackson nodded. "Weird gets easier." Lily wasn't sure about that, but she hoped he was right. Days passed. Then weeks. School wasn't easy, but it became routine. Lily caught up on the work she had missed. She started talking to Sophia more. She stopped flinching when teachers called on her. At home, things settled. Maya's nightmares became less frequent. Eric started reading again. Margaret got stronger. The apartment felt like theirs. One evening, as the sun dipped below the buildings, Lily sat on the fire escape, watching the sky shift to deep blue. She heard the door open behind her. Tom stepped outside, leaning against the railing. "You good?" Lily didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Do you ever get scared that if something's good, it won't last?" Tom let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he admitted. "All the time." Lily glanced at him. "How do you stop worrying about it?" Tom gave a small, wry smile. "You don't. You just hold on to it anyway." Lily turned back to the sky, the wind cool against her skin. She didn't say anything, but she stayed. The weeks kept slipping by, one after another, and for the first time in a long time, Lily didn't feel like she was waiting for the ground to fall out from under her. She still had nightmares sometimes, memories of cold nights, hunger, the fear of sirens, but they didn't come as often. And when they did, she knew she wasn't waking up alone. School became something she could manage, even if it still felt strange. She wasn't invisible anymore. Sophia made sure of that, dragging her into conversations at lunch, helping her catch up on old classwork, inviting her over to study. "You know, you could come over just to hang out," Sophia pointed out one afternoon, sprawled across Lily's bed with a notebook open in front of her. Lily hesitated. "I don't really do hangouts." Sophia rolled her eyes. "You do now." Lily snorted, shaking her head. But she didn't say no. At home, Margaret's health improved. She still had bad days, but she was stronger now. She fussed over them all, making sure Maya had her hair done right in the mornings, making Eric drink more water, making Lily promise to wear a jacket when it was cold. Lily pretended to be annoyed, but she never actually argued. The others were healing too. Eric started spending time at the library, losing himself in books. Maya had made a friend in her kindergarten class, a little girl named Alina, who had pink shoelaces and a stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. Tom and Jackson kept showing up. Not hovering, not pushing, just there. Tom helped Margaret with errands, dropping off groceries when she couldn't make it to the store. Jackson somehow became an expert at sneaking candy to the kids without Margaret noticing. It was quiet. Stable. It was normal. But Lily had learned a long time ago that normal never lasted. It started with a knock at the door. Lily froze, her heart kicking up in her chest. Margaret wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Lily, sweetheart, can you get that?" Lily hesitated, then moved to the door. She opened it slowly, bracing herself, and felt the breath rush out of her. A woman stood there, dressed in professional but slightly worn clothes, holding a folder in one hand. Her face was kind, but her eyes were sharp. "Lily Brooks?" Lily's stomach dropped. She didn't have to ask who the woman was. She already knew. Child Services. The woman smiled gently. "My name is Michelle Carter. I just need to speak with you and your grandmother for a moment." Lily's hands clenched at her sides. "We don't need anything." Michelle's smile didn't waver. "I understand, but I just want to check in, make sure everything is going well. May I come in?" Lily didn't move. Every part of her screamed no. Before she could slam the door, Margaret appeared beside her, placing a steady hand on Lily's shoulder. "Come in," Margaret said softly. Lily stiffened but stepped aside. Michelle walked in, looking around the apartment. It was clean, warm, lived in. There was nothing for her to pick apart, nothing she could use against them. But Lily didn't trust her. They sat at the small kitchen table. Michelle set down her folder. "I've been reviewing your case, Lily," she said. "You've been through a lot." Lily didn't answer. Michelle's gaze was steady but not unkind. "I just want to make sure you and your siblings are in a safe, stable home." Lily's pulse pounded in her ears. Siblings. They weren't her siblings, not legally. And if this woman figured that out. Margaret's voice was calm but firm. "They are in a safe home." Michelle nodded. "I don't doubt that. But official placements can be complicated. We want to ensure they have the right long-term care." Lily's stomach turned. Right long-term care meant one thing. Foster care. Being split up. Lily clenched her fists under the table. "We're fine," she said, voice tight. Michelle studied her. "You've done an incredible job looking after them, Lily. That's not in question. But the system, Margaret cut in, her voice sharp, would have let them starve on the street." Michelle blinked. "Mrs. Brooks. They were surviving on their own," Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly. "And if you take them now, you'll break them in ways you won't be able to fix." Silence stretched thick between them. Michelle sighed, rubbing her temple. "I'm not here to separate anyone today. But I do need to do my job. There's a process." Lily's nails dug into her palms. "And if we don't fit into your process?" Michelle hesitated. "Then, carefully, she said, then we find a way to make it work." Lily didn't trust her. But she wanted to. Michelle stood, smoothing her blazer. "I'll be in touch. We'll figure this out." And then she was gone. Lily sat rigid at the table, staring at the spot where Michelle's folder had been. Margaret exhaled slowly. "We'll handle this, sweetheart." Lily shook her head. "They're gonna take us away." "No, they won't. You don't know that." Margaret placed a gentle hand over Lily's. "We're not alone in this, Lily." Lily's throat felt tight. She wasn't sure she believed that. But later that night, when she sat on the fire escape, arms wrapped around her knees, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. Tom sat down beside her. "Margaret called," he said. Lily swallowed hard. "So you know." "Yeah." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Lily whispered, "They're gonna split us up." Tom's voice was quiet but sure. "No, they won't." Lily let out a bitter laugh. How do you know? Tom exhaled. Because I won't let them. Lily stared at him. You can't stop it. Tom looked at her, his expression unreadable. Watch me. And for the first time that day, Lily let herself breathe. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment, everything would come crashing down. She was used to fighting, used to keeping her guard up, but this was different. This wasn't about finding food or staying warm. This was about something bigger, something she couldn't outrun. Michelle came back as promised. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't cold. But she was still part of the system, and Lily had spent too much of her life learning not to trust it. Margaret handled most of the talking, keeping her voice steady, keeping her hands folded on the table like she wasn't afraid. Lily watched her closely, searching for any cracks in the act. So what happens now? Margaret asked. Michelle sighed. The situation is unusual. Legally, Lily is under your care, but the others. They are my children, Margaret interrupted. Michelle hesitated. I don't doubt that you love them, Mrs. Brooks. But love isn't always enough in the eyes of the law. Lily's hands clenched into fists under the table. Then what is? Margaret asked, voice sharp. Michelle studied her. A plan. Something solid that proves this arrangement isn't temporary. We need to make sure the children have the right support, financially and legally. Lily's heart sank. They had a home, but it wasn't theirs. Margaret had been making do with what little she had. What if it wasn't enough? What if we don't fit into your rules? Lily asked, forcing her voice to stay even. Michelle met her gaze. Then we find a way to make the rules work for you. Lily wanted to believe her. But she didn't. Not yet. After Michelle left, the weight of everything settled like a stone in Lily's chest. She could feel it pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She went to the fire escape, the place that had started to feel like her own quiet corner of the world. A few minutes later, Tom showed up. She didn't turn. Do you have some kind of alarm that tells you when I need to talk? Tom smirked, sitting down beside her. Something like that. Lily pulled her knees up to her chest. She wants proof that we belong together. Tom nodded slowly. Then that's what we give her. Lily sighed. It's not that easy. No, Tom agreed. But you're not doing this alone. Lily stared out over the city. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Tom didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was softer than usual. Good. That means you care. Lily frowned. That's supposed to help? Tom chuckled. Not really. But it means you'll fight for this. Lily let out a slow breath. I don't know if I can win. Tom's voice was steady. Then we make sure you do. The next few weeks were filled with paperwork, meetings, and waiting. Lily hated the waiting. Tom and Jackson worked behind the scenes, pulling every string they could. Tom met with people who didn't usually deal in second chances and made them listen. Jackson dug through every legal option, searching for loopholes, for anything they could use. Lily kept expecting something to go wrong. But for once, it didn't. One afternoon, Michelle returned with an answer. The application for guardianship has been approved, she said, setting a folder on the table. It's not official yet, but the process has started. If all goes well, Margaret will have full custody of all the children within a few months. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for the folder. Lily stared at Michelle. You're serious? Michelle smiled. Completely. Lily didn't know what to say. It was happening. It was real. Margaret let out a shaky breath. Thank you. Michelle nodded. It wasn't just me. She looked at Lily. You had a lot of people fighting for you. Lily swallowed hard. She wasn't used to that. Tom and Jackson showed up later that night. Margaret let them in, shaking her head with a small smile. You two are terrible at staying out of things that aren't your business. Tom smirked. You love us anyway. Margaret rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. Lily watched them from the doorway, arms crossed. So, you really did it. Jackson grinned. We? No. You did it. We just made sure no one got in your way. Lily shook her head. She hesitated, voice cracking slightly. I don't know how to say thank you for something like this. Tom studied her for a long moment. You already did, kid. Lily blinked. When? Tom pulled something from his pocket and handed it to her. A small, folded piece of paper. Lily recognized it immediately. Her drawing, the one she had given him months ago. She looked at him, surprised. You kept this? Tom's voice was rough but certain. Of course. Lily held onto the paper, feeling its weight, feeling everything it meant. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just stayed. And for the first time, she knew she wasn't going anywhere. The days that followed felt lighter in a way Lily hadn't expected. The constant fear, the ever-present weight of uncertainty, had eased, just a little. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe without worrying that everything would be ripped away. Margaret had full custody now. It wasn't just words on paper. It was real. They were a family, not just in the way they had always been, but in a way that no one could take from them. Lily didn't know what to do with that feeling. She still half expected something to go wrong. Maybe it would take time for her to believe that this was hers, that she didn't have to fight to keep it. The others were adjusting in their own ways. Eric had finally stopped checking the locks on the doors every night. Maya had started drawing pictures of their home, bright and colorful, like she finally trusted that it would always be there. Even Margaret seemed different, less tired, more at peace. Lily wasn't sure how to let go of the part of herself that had always been waiting for disaster. But she was trying. One afternoon, she sat outside on the fire escape, the crisp autumn air brushing against her skin. She watched the world below, listening to the distant hum of the city. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. You're thinking too hard. Lily glanced over as Tom sat down beside her. She smirked. I always think too hard. Tom let out a soft chuckle. Fair point. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the sun dipped lower, washing the city in shades of orange and gold. Eventually, Lily spoke. It still doesn't feel real. Tom studied her. What doesn't? All of it. She gestured vaguely. The apartment. School. This life. She hesitated. Sometimes I feel like I'm just waiting for someone to come in and tell me it was all a mistake. Tom nodded as if he understood. You've been in survival mode for a long time, kid. It's hard to let that go. Lily let out a breath, resting her chin on her knees. How do you stop feeling like it could all disappear? Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You don't. You just learn to live with it. Lily frowned. That's not exactly comforting. Tom smirked. Life isn't always comforting. She huffed, but there was no real bite to it. They sat there for a while longer, the cool air wrapping around them. Eventually, Tom spoke again. You know, you're allowed to be happy, Lily. Lily looked at him. Am I? Tom nodded. Yeah, you are. Lily didn't respond right away. Then, slowly, she let herself lean back against the railing, closing her eyes for just a moment. She wasn't sure if she believed him yet, but she wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The seasons changed. Fall faded into winter, bringing cold mornings and warm drinks, thick blankets and quiet evenings spent curled up on the couch. Maya started learning how to read, excitedly showing off every new word she figured out. Eric finally joined a club at school, something he never would have dared to do before. Margaret baked more often, filling the apartment with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla. And Lily? She let herself settle. It wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. Some nights she still woke up with old fears clinging to her chest. But those moments were fewer now. She had a home. She had a family. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. One evening, as snow began to dust the city streets, Tom and Jackson showed up with a Christmas tree strapped to the roof of Tom's car. Margaret stood in the doorway, hands on her hips. Where do you two think you're putting that? Jackson grinned. Right in your living room. Margaret sighed, shaking her head. But she stepped aside. The kids were thrilled. Maya insisted on putting on every decoration they owned. Eric pretended not to care, but still adjusted the ornaments when he thought no one was looking. Even Boots, their lazy rescue cat, seemed to approve, curling up beneath the tree like she owned it. Lily stood back, watching the chaos unfold. Jackson nudged her shoulder. Not bad, huh? Lily glanced at him. It's ridiculous. Jackson smirked. Yeah, but it's good ridiculous. Lily didn't argue. Because for once, she agreed. As the night stretched on, laughter filled the apartment, warm and real. And Lily, standing in the middle of it all, let herself believe that this life, this family, was hers to keep. Finally, she was home. And she wasn't going anywhere. The end.